Hey, everybody, I'm Ebony K. Williams along with Eric Bowling and Kat Timpf, and we are the Fox News Specialists. Well, the global stakes don't get much higher than this. President Trump meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time at today's G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. The two leaders taking part in a face-to-face sit-down that lasted for more than 2 hours, covering a big slate of global crises and issues. President Trump addressed perhaps the biggest elephant in the room, the Russian meddling in the U.S. election. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson debriefed reporters following the meeting.
The president pressed President Putin on more than one occasion regarding Russian involvement. President Putin denied such involvement, as I think he has in the past. The two leaders agreed, though, that this is a substantial hindrance in the ability of us to move the Russian-U.S. relationship forward.
Okay, Eric, we know that the U.S.-Russia relationship is very important. It's been both chilly and more friendly at various times. What do you think it stands today?
This was amazing. So a 40-minute meeting, a scheduled 40-minute meeting turns into 2 hours and 16 minutes. Trump extends a hand and the world takes notice. Putin addresses Trump as Your Excellency, and the world takes notice. Meanwhile, they negotiate a partial ceasefire in Syria. They negotiate how to handle North Korea. They'll get to that later. They're going to do more bilateral meetings with Xi and with South Korean leaders, Chinese and South Korean leaders. And they talk about Russian meddling. Meanwhile, so all this is being accomplished inside that building. Meanwhile, outside, the protesters, just juxtapose that for a minute. Protesters are throwing bottles and flaming bottles and rocks at police, and they're getting water cannons. So things are progressing. Yesterday I said I think this is going to be very positive for America. I think today was.
Eric points out people are kind of looking at the handshake and the gestures and kind of more the superficial optics of it. Are you surprised by that?
No, of course not. I'm not surprised that people are still somehow upset, saying President Trump accepted Putin's denial. What does that mean? Does that mean he moved on? That's probably what that meant. What did they want instead to just have the whole meeting be, no, I didn't, yeah, you did, no, I didn't, yeah, you did, no, I didn't, yeah, you did. There's a time for pettiness, and that's usually in your personal life, and not when it affects the entire world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So with that, we'll meet today's specialist. She's a Bosnian War survivor, a women's empowerment advocate, and a former Trump International Vice President. And she specializes in all things mixed martial arts. Sanada Azam is here. And he's a best-selling author, the founder of Skybridge Capital, and he was recently appointed by the Trump administration to be Chief Strategy Officer of the Export-Import Bank. So obviously he specializes in all things financial. Anthony Scaramucci is here. So Zanata, I'll start with you because you've actually worked hands-on with President Trump as his VP, Trump International, and you also know this region better than most.
Yes.
When you look at the dynamic between Vladimir Putin and President Trump, what do you see? What's your lens tell you?
Well, having just come back from Russia, actually, I was in St. Petersburg and Moscow. I was very excited to see what's going to happen today. And I do believe this was a historic meeting. I do believe it went well, based on not just the body language, but also what was negotiated. And I do believe also that what's going to come out afterwards, because we're not privy to all the details of this meeting, we're going to find out that I believe President Trump had his opportunity to shine on the global stage. And this is such an important relationship right now with Putin, because they have an opportunity to solve many serious problems that we're facing.
Speaking of relationships, Anthony, you also know the president quite well. And congratulations, by the way, on your new appointment.
Thanks, Eb. Well, first off, I'm glad that Sonata said that she went to Russia and not me. Otherwise, I'd be in the gallows.
So good.
Thank God.
Well
Thank God
played.
that you would not me.
Well played.
Let's see how that gets reported.
Yeah, I'll now say that I was there with you. So,
Scaramucci went to Russia, and Sonata's the new head of the Exim Bank.
It's really bad, Eric. It's really bad. But here's what I would say, and this I think is going to surprise people and shock the detractors of the president, is that he's a lot tougher than they want to position him as. They want to position him as soft on Russia, an apologist for Putin, and all this sort of nonsense. It's actually the very opposite. I think what you'll find is that he's a very tough negotiator. He's a guy that will strengthen sanctions if he feels necessary. But he's also a guy, they won't give him any credit for this, that has an understanding of Russian history and what the Russian alliance has been like with the United States since World War II. Now, let's remind viewers here that the Russians lost 24.8 million people in World War II, and without their help, we would have never defeated the Nazis. And so We've got to figure out a way to bring it together, and I think the president has the best opportunity of anybody in the last 25 years to do that for us.
This is such good. I mean, we should be looking at this meeting and feeling so good about things, because I remember during the Cold War where we were deathly afraid of Russia sending a bomb, a nuclear bomb our way, and we were thinking about doing the same to them, and that would have been mutual destruction
Disaster.
of global proportions. This is great when you have two superpowers who are very likely the two strongest, most powerful people on the planet, able to shake hands and have mutual respect. Boy, I think that is a much safer place for everyone.
Can I ask
I
a
don't
question?
respect Vladimir Putin.
Well, Kat, before we go there, though, I want to ask Eric this, because you talk about kind of these two simultaneous global leaders, kind of an equal footing, if I'm hearing you right, more or less. My question is, can that coexist?
Let's pray to God that it can and does, because if it doesn't, you know, we won't be worrying about North Korea. We'll be worrying about a global, you know, World War III, which could, you know, decimate civilizations. But this is good, though. You don't have to respect him. You can keep him at an arm's length, but I like the fact that there's a handshake, not what's he up to. I'm going to undermine him. I'm going to take him out when he looks the other way.
Right. Well, that's entirely my point, is that President Trump did bring up the election meddling. He didn't have that be the entire focus. What would that do? Just make him feel good or look tough? There's real issues that they need to talk about. Syria. And then, of course, China and Russia getting closer and closer. We don't have to be Russia's best friend forever, but we certainly don't want Russia and China to become best friends forever, because President Trump was too worried about being petty. You don't have to like him. You don't have to respect him. But you do have to get along and make a real effort to get along. And I was really, really glad to see that that appears to have been what happened.
Oh, excellent. Moving forward, hopefully, in that relationship. Another major development out of today's Trump-Putin meeting came over Syria. Secretary Tillerson again delivering the details to reporters.
A ceasefire has been entered into, and I think this is our first indication of the U.S. and Russia being able to work together in Syria. And as a result of that, we had a very lengthy discussion regarding other areas in Syria that we can continue to work together on to de-escalate the areas and the violence once we defeat ISIS, and to work together towards a political process that will secure the future of the Syrian people.
Okay, Senator, we know that when President Trump sent over those missiles to Syria, that was not well received, obviously, by Putin and Russia, and that was kind of one of those markers of the chilliness of the relationship. So this ceasefire, what do you see from it?
So I think it's going to be there, and it's going to continue. Putin respects Trump, but I do think that they're going to respect that ceasefire. And President Trump intervened in Syria, despite many people suggesting not to do so, but he simply couldn't bear to stand witness to so many children being killed in the most horrific way. And trust me, I've lived through a war. I know what's it like. So when he saw those children being killed, he had to order.
What is this ceasefire really? I mean, so Russia is defending Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The U.S. is against Bashar al-Assad in Syria. ISIS is fighting. There's supposedly a civil war going on. What does a civil war really entail? I'm not really understanding the nuts and bolts of what this de-escalation zone and ceasefire is.
Well, okay, so it's very important to understand the geology and the tribal nature of what's going on over there, okay? So Assad represents a tribe in Syria that has held power for many thousands of years. It's important to understand that because he's not going anywhere. He's entrenched. He'll fight to the last person, and there's a blood oath among his people to do that. Against him or the Syrian, Syrian Freedom Forces.
For the sake of our audience, are we not going to? Have we ceased fire? In other words, we're not going to attack him?
No, I think the president has made clear that no more chemical weapons. If you continue to use chemical weapons, then there'll be greater military intervention by the United States.
Is that a red line?
I think it's a very bright red line. I think he's made that very clear, and my guess is that he'll enforce that red line, unlike what happened in the past.
So is this Russia saying they will not defend Bashar al-Assad?
No, I think what they're trying to do right now is to see if they can negotiate an impasse and to figure out a way to stop the violence and stop the killing of innocents and obviously causing the refugee problem. But the critical thing for Americans to understand is Assad is not going anywhere. He either has to be taken out, and that means his tribal regime has to be taken out with him, or we're going to have a protracted problem in Syria for decades.
Now, Anthony, you brought up history. And on that note, McCall Gorbachev, excuse me, the former leader of the Soviet Union, is calling President Trump and Vladimir Putin to restore the trust between the U.S. and Russia. They want to create a constructive joint agenda. President Trump's meeting with Putin and his trip to Europe is drawing many historical comparisons to past presidents, a point hit by Laura Ingraham earlier today.
I worked in the Reagan administration, and when I was watching it yesterday, it really did take me back. And I say this, like, he's not Reagan. Nobody's Reagan. And I'm not trying to say he is Reagan. But the moment where he said, does the West have the will to survive? Do we have the will to confront the challenges before us? I say we do. It was very optimistic.
All right, Kat, so we know he's not Reagan. That part was clear.
Yeah, I had no idea.
No, breaking news.
Close.
But what do you think about the historical parallels?
They're fine. I think that right now it would be stupid to completely trust Russia. We are facing issues like North Korea and Syria, especially with, again, China and Russia. If they become best friends forever and we're left out of it, then we're going to have a lot of options off the table for North Korea. So nobody should have a problem with that, except if they're just being petty.
I think what that was all about was Gorbachev, if you remember Reagan saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, and that reunited Germany, East and West Berlin in Germany. What I think Laura may be getting at was Donald Trump showed a strong hand with the Russians, and they seemed to respond to that. If you remember leading up to that moment of the wall coming down, we were afraid of them, they were afraid of us. There was a lot of cat and mouse going back and forth, and Reagan just said, you know what, we're done with this. Tear down the wall. We're going to unite Germany.
This is also one meeting that just happened, so we're going to have to kind of wait and see how it all plays out.
That's true. But to Eric's point, a lot of people wanted that line out of the speech from Reagan, and ultimately he put it in, and, you know, something good came of it, so we'll see. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio skipping town for Germany, planning to join the G20 protest. Yes, I did say protest. Well, guess what? Eric Bolling is hitting the roof about it. I know we can't believe it when we come back.
Won't say protest. All right, time to wake up America. On Wednesday, Officer Mia Sotis Familia was assassinated while sitting in her patrol car in Bronx, New York. Officer Familia, her name literally means family, had 3 loving kids. She's being mourned at this very moment. And yesterday, the NYPD swore in the incoming class of 2017, 524 men and women. It's nearly a statistical certainty that some will be killed in the line of duty. For these events, Mayor Bill de Blasio is nowhere to be found. That's because de Blasio is in Germany to deliver a keynote speech to anti-Trump far-left goons rioting at G20 meetings. A disrespectful SOB of a mayor he is. But de Blasio is no stranger to disrespecting law enforcement. Recall in 2014 when officers Wenjin Liu and Rafael Ramos were assassinated just days after de Blasio's public display of disrespect for cops. Remember, de Blasio warning his biracial son to be wary of New York cops. Now recall the response from the NYPD, a sentiment shared by millions of us Americans. Turning their back on the mayor. New York is crumbling. Crime is shaking the city. Homeless people are urinating in the streets. And de Blasio, you decided it was a good idea to front the far-left goons. Stop flattering yourself, Bill. You're not a social justice warrior. You're not a progressive for the people. You're a despicable, self-dealing clown who traveled to Germany to feed your need for cameras and microphones. I pray your liberal pals recognize the hole in your soul and never vote for you for anything other than lamest human being on the planet. For that, you'd win by a New York mile. And do us all a favor and listen to the New York Post, which speaks for millions of Americans. And don't come back, de Blasio. Don't come back. Ebony, too hard on him?
You're not voting for de Blasio for re-election?
Yeah, I think I'll...
Just kidding. No, you know what? This is poorly played by the mayor, by any measure. To me, it's horrible and more egregious than last week. We all know here in New York City, a mess with our transit systems, derailments every other day, drives right past them like it's not even happening, goes to the gym in Park Slope instead. I'm really not certain what he thinks his role is other than to lead the city of New York and be there to raise morale. We know that a class of cadets graduated today. He wasn't there for that either.
524 men and women.
Yeah, going over to...
right, well, listening to de Blasio talk about the police force, he loves to complain and he loves to sort of dismiss them. And it's almost as if he forgets that's actually his police force. It's not like he's just some dude with a blog about the issue. He's the mayor of New York City and they are the NYPD. Imagine, I mean, not working with them, not being there when there's a tragedy that takes place. A manager at McDonald's couldn't behave this way. And we have the mayor of New York City behaving this way. Everyone's right to be disgusted. I don't know what he was thinking, but I'm sure he's going to come back and play the victim and say the police are being mean to me and it's not fair. Well, take a look at what you're doing here.
Anthony, what about this client? I cannot believe he took off with all this stuff going on here in New York.
I think it's a brilliant move by the mayor. I'm going to take the other side of it. I want you guys to hear me out. Okay? I can't stand the guy, but he won by 71% of the vote. Only 1 million people voted at an eligibility of 3 million. There's a tremendous amount of apathy here in the streets of New York. New York City residents are not voting. If they don't like what's going on in the streets, the urination, the panhandling, all of the nonsense, get out and vote for somebody like Bo Dietl. Get this guy out of City Hall.
Here's my point, though, is he's always complaining about the NYPD,
because it plays to his base.
Work with them.
I understand that, but he doesn't care about the NYPD. It's not his base. He doesn't care. He's into these left-wing radicals. They're going to show up and vote for him. This plays his base. It's political brilliance, whether you guys like it or not.
So do you think, Sonata, is this, he's playing for a bigger crowd? He's looking for a bigger platform. Forget New York City mayor. He wants to be some sort of national. He wants to be president. Maybe he does.
Look, Eric, everyone loves to go to Europe during summer. I do too. But I think he went to the wrong part of Europe at the wrong time. I think at this point we need to show unity. And if we have President Trump representing the United States of America at such important meeting, I think he should show support.
Forget support.
At home.
He went. He keynoted the protests, the rioters, the anarchists' speech, or their little get-together. He keynoted that. Oh, America, his city's burning here.
His city's burning. Well, I don't know if it's burning, but
this is the most disgusting the streets have ever been. Anthony, people are urinating in the streets. There's homeless population.
But beyond that,
everywhere.
can I make this point, Eric? Can I make the point that there is a law enforcement officer, as you point out in your monologue, in the Bronx, shot and killed, basically assassinated.
Doesn't care.
And that's the part that I find completely disheartening.
I think it's totally despicable, but it is, as a politician, he's politically brilliant because all he cares about is galvanizing his base and getting those people to turn out in September, November. Again, if you don't like it, let's cause a movement. And let's get people that really hate what's going on in the city to vote him out of office.
Yeah, but Kat, even liberals can't like the fact that the trains are delayed for hours. The snow removal's horrible. They can't love the way. Why would they vote?
We pay
this guy
so
into
many
higher
taxes,
office?
and there's so much garbage on the street all the time. It doesn't really make sense. No, the thing that bothers me the most about this is we know that in the future he'll be complaining about the NYPD giving him problems, or they don't like me, this and that. You're not the victim. If you're not there for them the way that you're supposed to be, then what do you expect?
But Scaramucci makes a good point, because I talked to Curtis Lee, our friend, about this bowling, and I say he's got to be vulnerable, right? I mean, this has got to be an opportunity where he can. So he was like, no, the apathy is so strong, the voter turnout is always so low, that likely he'll be reelected.
Hey, we had Mayor Rudy Giuliani, a Republican. We had a mayor in Bloomberg who was an independent / Republican.
Just remember, the worst
it
time.
Can happen.
The worst time prior to this was '93. Giuliani lost in '89 against Dinkins. He challenged Dinkins in '93. He only won by 2% of the vote, and it was a complete annihilation of the city going on, similar to what's going on today. It's very, very tough to win here if you're not a Democrat. This guy is a disaster. He deserves to be out of office.
What about a challenger from within the Democratic Party?
Yeah,
how about that?
We'll take anything at this point.
Yeah, I mean, what about that?
Bo Dietl.
We're going to leave it right there. Up next, Republican senators facing increasingly unsafe health care protests as Mitch McConnell voices new doubts about getting a...
Congress may be in recess, but Republican senators are facing increasingly unruly crowds back home over health care.
22 million reasons why we won't let our people die. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is a...
7 protesters were arrested yesterday at the office of Senator John Cornyn in Texas. Also yesterday in Phoenix and Tucson, 5 protesters were arrested. The Arizona offices of Senator Jeff Flake. All this as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is hinting at the potential failure of a Republican health care bill during the remarks in Kentucky, saying, quote, If my side is unable to agree on an adequate replacement, then some kind of action with regard to the private health insurance market must occur. No action is not an alternative. We've got the insurance markets imploding all over the country, including this state. 7 years, and this is what we've got, guys. This is a mess. I couldn't even imagine more of a mess if I tried.
No.
Agree.
Unacceptable.
Agree.
So what's going to happen,
You know
Eric?
what those protests look like? The same thing that the
Tea Party.
The Tea Party, the right, did to Democrats in 2009. And look what we got. Honestly, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump and the administration, but I think taking Paul Ryan's word that they had a bill that A, the American people liked, and B, they could get through Congress was his mistake. He should have just waited and seen until it was right. Took Obama a long time to get health care right.
Technically, Eric, I think politically speaking, the time is an issue, right? I think when you come out the gate, first 6 months of the administration, with this as your kind of marquee legislative effort, and there's been failure after failure after failure, House and Senate, politically, it just isn't good.
Right.
Unless you win with taxes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think you should have gone with taxes
That's a
first.
funny way of healing a wound of not winning with health care.
Money, money, money. Absolutely. Who doesn't want that? I think there would be people on both sides of the aisle even excited to see
Does
some
it
tax relief.
bother anyone else that they have all this vacation that they get to take when they have this disaster just sitting there waiting to be tackled?
I think it bothers a lot of people in the White House. They would prefer them not to take the reset cat, or maybe take 2 weeks as opposed to 6 weeks. But to Eric's point, it took 22 months to get Obamacare from zero into legislation that was enacted. It's very, very difficult to do these things. It's taken 60 years of failed attempts by prior presidents to get the health care thing right. It's so wrong right now, but it will never be right in the United States. And I really believe this until we break the duopoly between the insurance carriers and the patient care, which includes the physicians in the hospitals. Until that duopoly is broken and we can start a technological S-curve like we have in other industries, you'll have spiraling costs. And it was Reagan that deregulated telecom, and it was Jimmy Carter that deregulated airlines, and both ended up with magnificent results. It's time to deregulate healthcare as well as fix the healthcare system. And our president, President Trump, is capable of doing that, but needs to get a team in place to explain that.
I completely agree. I would like to see something that involves the cloud, that is more patient-focused rather than insurance company-focused or government-focused. What do you think should be done?
My opinion is that they have to step back first. When they're trying to rush things through, particularly during summer when everyone wants to take vacation, it's just not going to work. And I think we have to focus on the big picture. The fact of the matter is that the system doesn't work. Going back and looking at what's really important to people and how to address so many of these people's concerns who are protesting, so that we can find something that's not mean, quote unquote, that actually can help people and that can save lives. Because when you see human faces behind these numbers, then you forget that we can just get over this.
We're talking about real lives. But Anthony, I mean, obviously you're right? So you're talking about extracting the middleman, so to speak, from this process and putting him. What is the incentive, though, because this is the frustration for these insurance companies to get out of this and stop dipping their hands in the pot so that the American people can get the health care they need?
It goes back to Eric's best-selling book, The Swamp. Okay, and so what happens in Eric's best-selling book, The Swamp, is that the creatures take control of the situation and they force the lobbying on the Congress and they freeze them from doing what is the right thing to do for the American people.
But that is really what the issue is here, though, is the lobbyists. Lobbyists have their well, first their bank accounts, but their claws into lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who want to keep the system in place so they can continue that money gravy train going back.
Right. Well, now we're using
not the best for the people.
We're using health care and health insurance interchangeably when they're not the same thing.
No tort reform, lack of insurance competition, extra regulation on primary care.
Why not, though?
Status quo,
but why not? Here, 64,000. Why not? Why did they put a bill together that didn't address those things when we
Because they're afraid of
complained about
political
it for 7
consequences.
years?
They're afraid of political consequences.
Not
Everyone in the country,
No,
a lot of people, and political as well. I believe that's a huge part of it because people in this country, a lot of them, even so-called Republicans, so-called conservatives, have this idea that if something is going to be done, the government has to do it. That if there's not this government health insurance, then everyone's going to be sick and die, which it just isn't the case. And there's only a couple of people who are really pushing back against that.
I think it's their bank accounts.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Anthony Scaramucci and Sanata Ajam. Let's continue the conversation. Loretta Lynch pushing back against reports that she assured the Clinton campaign that the Hillary email probe wouldn't go, quote, too far. The reports have been driven by a Russian intelligence memo, which has its credibility in question, that says Lynch gave the assurance to former Clinton campaign aide Amanda Renteria. The Senate Judiciary Committee is investigating that claim, and late yesterday, Lynch's lawyer sent a letter to the committee denying the allegations. Ebony, can you break this down? There's a lot of going back and forth.
It is. And
What's Loretta Lynch claiming?
So she's claiming that she didn't put any assurances to kind of limit the scope of the Clinton investigation. I think if it was just this stuff, Eric, that we're seeing, kind of maybe some suspect credibility amongst these leaked memos, maybe she'd be okay. But Jim Comey's still a problem for Loretta Lynch, because who could forget that compelling testimony that we all sat and waited for, where he basically said Loretta Lynch gave him Clinton campaign words around how to deal with the investigation.
Don't call it an investigation.
Don't call it an investigation.
This isn't even the worst of it to me, because saying, oh, it shouldn't go too far, that would be bad, don't get me wrong. But for her to tell Comey, call it a matter, not investigation, that's her using her position to make sure, or try to make sure, that it doesn't go too far. I mean, that's very serious.
Anthony, if you're Loretta Lynch, the seated Attorney General, don't you tell him to don't get on my airplane?
Don't get on the airplane. He then says he was playing golf somewhere. No one can find him anywhere into the golf courses. One of the most famous people in the world, can't find him playing golf. But there's something in here that the president has to use in his defense. The Comey, Mr. Comey, he didn't understand what was going on with Loretta Lynch's story. He took memos. He had false interpretation there. And I think there's a little bit of false interpretation in terms of his messaging and communication with the president. And so in a bipartisan way, James Comey got a misinterpretation of two different parties' people and their analysis. And I think Jay Sekulow and those guys need to start using that as one of the devices in their defense of the president as it relates to the Mueller special investigation.
Senator, in order to believe Loretta Lynch, you'd have to have a lot of things line up. And I just, for some reason, when it doesn't seem like they can all be true at the same time.
Eric, I mean, we're relying on this information based on Russian intelligence. They're probably correct, but at the same time, I feel like the sources are not fully disclosed. We don't know exactly how this came about. I do agree that she's in a tough spot, and I do agree with Kat that I think more things will come out. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm like kind of bored talking about the email probe, because once the elections were over and President Trump became president.
Isn't this the only obstruction of justice that we can possibly find in the last year and a half?
I'm not going to step on that. But I'll give you this instead. Loretta Lynch, I remember being on another program on the network, literally live when she got on the tarmac with Bill Clinton, or he got on the plane, rather. And I said then that her credibility is now in question. The problem, Eric, is that all that's happened since that meeting with Bill Clinton on the plane is it's gone further and further and further down, and the it being Loretta Lynch's credibility.
What in the world else could Loretta Lynch be alluding to when she tells James Comey, her FBI director, who works for her, to don't call it an investigation? Why not? It is.
That certainly looks like her using her position to have an influence politically, which is obviously disgusting and inappropriate, which is why, like I said, that not only comes from a more credible source, someone actually saying it under oath rather than just from Russian intelligence, we don't know who it's from or verified. And that seems worse to me, too, because it's her not just saying, oh, it shouldn't go too far. That shows her actually taking steps to try to make that a reality.
Final thought, Anthony.
We have to stop politicizing the Justice Department of the United States. At the end of the day, we're all slaves to these institutions, and we're slaves to the law in order to be free. And if you really want to fracture the republic, start politicizing the Justice Department. Okay, we need to take that back and make it more of a fairer, balanced institution.
Anthony, they're politicizing themselves. We have the head of the FBI. We have department heads, agency heads who are putting themselves on TV outings, calling the New York Times and whatnot. I mean, it's not us politicizing them. These people who are
no, I don't mean. I'm talking about our society. I don't mean us here at the Specialists. Our society has to stop politicizing. The people that are working in these departments have to stop politicizing it. If you read through the Federalist Papers, one of the biggest things that they were concerned about when they formed the republic is in order to maintain the republic, you have to be subordinate to the institutions and to the framework of the Constitution. And what's happening now is people are subverting that for political gain. We've got to be very careful.
We're going to leave it right there. A former Guantanamo Bay detainee who killed a U.S. soldier is now being given millions of dollars from the Canadian government. How in the world is this possible? Ebony's docket is all over it next.
I'm sorry for the pain it might cause the families of the victims. There's nothing I can do about the past, but I hope that the future I can do something about the future.
So Omar Khadir's plea to move on from the past taps into one of our great American values, second chances. Sounds reasonable enough, right? But what if I told you that he's asking to move on from being a vicious murderer? In 2002, at 15 years old, Khadir, a Canadian citizen, took part in a firefight in Afghanistan against the U.S. forces. During that battle, Khadir killed a U.S. Army soldier, Sergeant First Class Christopher Spear. Now, subsequently, Khadir pleaded guilty and was sentenced to an 8-year prison sentence in military prison. But here's where things get complicated. The Supreme Court of Canada later ruled that Canadian intelligence officials got the evidence from Khadir under oppressive circumstances, such as sleep deprivation during interrogations at Guantanamo Bay, and that they then shared that evidence with U.S. officials. So basically, the court decided that the plea was tainted by coercion. And on that basis, Khadir has appealed his conviction, and that appeal is currently still outstanding. Now, typically when officials commit wrongdoing, they're required to make the person that they wronged whole. They do that with money. Now, in this case, Canada has agreed to pay Khadir $8 million for his pain and suffering. Now, I get that Canadian officials wronged him, but this just doesn't sit well with me. Two things happened here that we know of. We know the Canadian officials were wrong in their actions, and we still don't know whether or not Khadir is actually guilty of murder, but we know that he absolutely could be. And for me, until we resolve that on appeal, handing over $8 million today, well, that just doesn't seem like justice. Eric?
Why in the hell does he have any rights at all? Why? Listen, you want to do that? Canada, knock yourself out. Keep that SOB in Canada. Here's the issue. Enhanced interrogation techniques that we used in Guantanamo Bay. 3 times it was waterboarding. It stopped. Sleep deprivation is now an enhanced interrogation technique that's illegal. This is terrible. I wish he'd come back here. I wish he'd just come back here. And you want to try him again, because I understand he did what he's being accused of. It's just the technique of getting him to admit to it that they have a problem with.
Well, okay, a little bit more complicated than that, Eric. He's saying that he didn't do it. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that the only reason he agreed to plead guilty to it is because he was coerced. It was
he was very sleepy.
He's just sleepy.
Yeah.
I've been pretty tired, but I've never said I killed somebody
exactly
when
right.
I was tired. Again, sleep deprivation, how? I don't know what that looks like. I'm not familiar with it. Like, were they actually forcing him awake? Can you really do that? Because there's been times where nothing can keep me awake. If I'm tired enough, I can sleep anywhere.
I want to stop. I want to full stop, because here's the thing. I think this guy's disgusting. Certainly he did what he did. But forced confessions are a real problem in this country, right? You know, Central Park 5. So, yes, Kat, people can be made to stay up. They're questioned for 24, 26 hours at a time. And that's not what we do here in America. So, to your point, Eric, if Canada wants to
he doesn't have rights. He's not an American citizen.
He's not an American citizen. But this isn't us doing that, right? This is Canada.
This is Canada. I know, but I'm talking about in Guantanamo. We didn't have any rights.
The criminal procedure laws, whether we like them or not, are written for the protection of innocence. If you live in a free and fair society like the United States or Canada tries to be, you have to ask yourself the rhetorical question, in order to protect innocence, would you let a killer go? Would you let a robber go in order to make sure that innocent people don't get caught in the net of injustice? That's the question that you ask yourself when you're examining this or any of these other cases.
No. The difference here being he's not an American citizen. He doesn't
this is
have.
in Canada.
But I'm saying that Canada is applying the same procedural prism.
The activity that happened at Guantanamo Bay does not apply.
Before we circle back with Anthony Scaramucci and Sunita Ajam, Eric, you have an announcement about your book.
Very quickly, a couple of full screens. I'm flying out tonight. I'm going to be in Florida all day tomorrow. Check it out, Barnes & Noble, Sarasota, then over to Lakeland, then to the Villages, and then on to Vero Beach. And then Sunday, another packed schedule. Books A Million, Panama City, Florida, Greenville, South Carolina, and then again in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A lot of stops. I'll put that up on Twitter. You can check it out.
Eric,
come out and hang out. And
Eric, give the book cover pose before we go, though. Give the book. It's hot. It's hot.
Right.
Selling books.
All right, absolutely. I want to ask you a question, though. Are you a little upset that you weren't invited to the meeting today since you and Putin are so close? That's what I've heard. I mean,
Vladimir, I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't get the memo. Maybe next time.
Stuff like that can really hurt,
Oh, man. So not
President Putin. I don't mean disrespect. I was just joking.
just jokes here at the special.
This is terrible. I wish he'd come back here. I wish he'd just come back here. And you want to try him again, because I understand he did what he's being accused of. It's just the technique of getting him to admit to it that they have a problem with.
Well, okay, a little bit more complicated than that, Eric. He's saying that he didn't do it. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that the only reason he agreed to plead guilty to it is because he was coerced. It was
he was very sleepy.
Yeah.
I've been pretty tired, but I've never said I killed somebody
exactly
when
right.
I was tired. Again, sleep deprivation, how? I don't know what that looks like. I'm not familiar with it. Like, were they actually forcing him awake? Can you really do that? Because there's been times where nothing can keep me awake. If I'm tired enough, I can sleep anywhere.
I want to stop. I want to full stop, because here's the thing. I think this guy's disgusting. Certainly he did what he did. But forced confessions are a real problem in this country,
Obviously.
right? Central Park 5. So, yes, people can be made to stay up. They're questioned for 24, 26 hours at a time. And that's not what we do here in America. So, to your point, Eric, if Canada wants to
he doesn't have
do
rights.
That,
he's not an American citizen.
He's not an American citizen. But this isn't us doing that, right? This is Canada.
Rules
This is Canada.
Rule, I know, but I'm talking about in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
We didn't have any rights.
The criminal procedure laws, whether we like them or not, are written for the protection of innocence. If you live in a free and fair society like the United States or Canada tries to be, you have to ask yourself the rhetorical question, in order to protect innocence, would you let a killer go? Would you let a robber go in order to make sure that innocent people don't get caught in the net of injustice? That's the question that you ask yourself when you're examining this or any of these other cases.
No. The difference here being he's not an American citizen. He
but
doesn't
this is in
have.
Canada.
But I'm saying that Canada is applying the same procedural prism.
The activity that happened at Guantanamo Bay does not apply.
Before we circle back with Anthony Scaramucci and Sunita Ajam, Eric, you have an announcement about your book.
Very quickly, a couple of full screens. I'm flying out tonight. I'm going to be in Florida all day tomorrow. Check it out, Barnes & Noble, Sarasota, then over to Lakeland, then to the Villages, and then on to Vero Beach. And then Sunday, another packed schedule. Books A Million, Panama City, Florida, Greenville, South Carolina, and then again in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A lot of stops. I'll put that up on Twitter. You can check it out.
Eric,
come out and hang out. And
Eric, give the book cover pose before we go, though. Give the book. It's hot. It's hot.
Right.
Selling books.
All right, absolutely. I want to ask you a question, though. Are you a little upset that you weren't invited to the meeting today since you and Putin are so close? That's what I've heard. I mean,
Vladimir, I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't get the memo. Maybe next time.
Stuff like that can really hurt,
Oh, man. So
President Putin. I don't mean disrespect. I was just joking.
Just jokes here at the special. So now let me ask you this. You also worked with President Trump when you were VP of Trump International. Give me one memory of what that was like.
Oh, it was so tough. I remember working until like 11 p.m., starting at 9 a.m. for 6 days a week. And he would come after dinner with his wife just to see who was still at the office. Ooh. And he always kept an eye on who was working hard. So he's very loyal to his people if his people are loyal to him.
Good to know.
Okay. Absolutely. That's absolutely fantastic to hear. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I would tell you, I'm halfway through Eric's book. It's phenomenal. It's insightful about what is really going on. My question for Eric, though, is it a gold-plated hot tub without a drain, Eric? Because it seems like these lobbyists are doing better than ever.
Think of this for 1 second. Donald Trump, one of the first things he did, he said, how much are these Air Force 1 and 2 going to cost the American taxpayer? He said, no, we're going to get that down. What other president has ever asked how much, right?
Hashtag baller.
That's the beginning.
Baller.
That's how
All right, well, thank you to our Fox News specialists today, Anthony Scaramucci and Sunita Ajam, and we thank you all for watching. Make sure to follow us on